Flood risk can and does change over time. Flood risks change for many reasons. New development, changes in levee classification, and environmental changes, just to name a few. As a result, FEMA is updating flood hazard maps across the country. These new flood maps, also known as Digital Flood Insurance Rate Maps, or DFIRMs, show flood risk at a property-by-property level. So what happens when new maps are issued in your community? Well, many property owners face changes to the assigned flood risk zone for their homes and businesses. If the property is mapped out of a high-risk area, the flood insurance cost will likely decrease. If the property has been mapped into a high-risk area, it may require the purchase of flood insurance if the loan is through a federally regulated or insured lender. This is Dorothy Martinez, a certified floodplain manager with H2O Partners, here to talk to you, the floodplain manager, on how to address questions about the implications of map changes on the cost of flood insurance. As a community point of contact for the National Flood Insurance Program, you may be asked, how does the new zone or change in base flood elevation affect my insurance policy cost? Well, although it may be wise to redirect that property owner to his or her insurance agent, it is also important that you have a general understanding of two processes that could benefit a property owner in your community who was recently impacted by a map change. In this short video, I'll introduce you to grandfathered rating and the preferred risk policy eligibility extension. When it comes to insurance, risk has a direct effect on premium. For example, if someone is purchasing automobile insurance and they have several speeding violations, it will impact the rate. Well, flood insurance is similar. The flood zone that a property is in has an impact on how much the property owner will pay for flood insurance. However, the NFIP's grandfathered rating acts as an exemption. It's been around for many years, and here's how it works. Grandfathering allows property owners to lock in flood zone and base flood elevation information from a previous flood map when the rating approach is more favorable. Now, it does it in two ways, using what is called the continuous coverage rule, as well as the built-in compliance approach. The continuous coverage rule applies to property owners who buy a policy before the map revision and continue to renew it without a break in coverage. By doing that, they lock in the previous flood zone or even the previous base flood elevation. This part of the rule applies to all buildings in your community. But what if a property owner doesn't buy flood insurance before the new map revision? Well, there is a second chance for them to benefit from grandfathered rating. The second chance option is called the built-in compliance rule. If a building was constructed in compliance with a specific flood insurance rate map, then it may use the map's zone or base flood elevation at the time of construction as the rating approach, if it's more favorable. In order to qualify, the property owner will need to provide their insurance agent proof of the previous zone or base flood elevation. That's where you come into play. Although FEMA's website provides historical map information, many property owners may look to their local floodplain manager for assistance with finding the previous map or base flood elevation. Now, keep in mind that this part of the rule typically applies to newer buildings built after your community's first flood insurance rate map. For more recent map changes, the better route may be to use the second option I mentioned earlier, the Preferred Risk Policy Eligibility Extension. This extension allows certain property owners recently affected by a map change to receive low-cost premium. In the past, the only buildings eligible for lower preferred premiums were buildings in the lower risk zones of B, C, or X, and that had minimal loss history. But in January of 2011, FEMA introduced the Preferred Risk Policy Eligibility Extension as an exception to that rule. Since many property owners that have been newly mapped into special flood hazard areas are required to buy flood insurance as a condition of their loan. This exception allows those buildings affected by a map revision on or after October 1st, 2008 to receive a lower premium. Now remember, although this rule didn't go into effect until January 1st, 2011, it does apply to map changes all the way back to October of 2008. While you aren't expected to provide rating information to property owners within your community, it is important to know that these provisions exist and can provide options to reduce premiums after a map change. So when maps are updated in your community, refer inquiring eligible property owners to their insurance agent and/or the FloodSmart website at floodsmart.gov for up-to-date information about these cost-saving approaches to minimize the impact of new maps. This is Dorothy Martinez with H2O Partners, hoping you gain some additional knowledge and thanking you for your interest in the National Flood Insurance Program.